All right. Hey there, and welcome to this episode where we're going to talk about what is the difference between OCD and intrusive thoughts. And so, for those who don't know me, my name is Matt Codde. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm the founder of Restored Minds and the creator of the AAA Response. And before we dive into the show, I just really would like to ask for your support by liking and subscribing, as well as leaving us a comment and a review on iTunes and Spotify, as it helps the algorithm of the show and it helps us get this information to more people that need it. And so just please take a second and show your support by doing that. We'd greatly appreciate it. Also, if you haven't already, make sure to register for the upcoming Intrusive Thoughts workshop that I have coming up, as the links are right in the notes below. So make sure to do that before we do it on August 30th, 2023. And if you're listening or watching this after, the replay will be available as well, just by looking in the link in the notes. So the question of, this is a question that we got, and it's a great question. So what's the difference between OCD and intrusive thoughts? This could take on also the form of like, can you have anxiety and intrusive thoughts? Do intrusive thoughts mean that you have OCD? And kind of any arrangement of those questions. So what we got to understand is that OCD, when we talk about anxiety, when we talk about the experience of anxiety, we're talking about a spectrum of an experience, right? All the way from having anxiety about, a date or a presentation, to social anxiety, to phobias, to OCD, to panic attacks, to depersonalization and derealization, right? It's a spectrum of an experience. And it's not like you don't have, so if you thought about it like a fuel gauge, right? From empty to full, right? You would fall somewhere on the spectrum of it, and that would change from time to time. It's very possible for someone that has general anxiety to have a full-blown panic attack out of nowhere, and it's also possible for someone who has quote-unquote OCD that generally tends to be diagnosed or defined with intrusive thoughts to have social anxiety because of the intrusive thoughts. It doesn't mean that they have this whole spectrum of disorders. In my opinion, what it means is that they're experiencing psychological stress, which means the mind is creating a thought and it's actually activating the nervous system, even though nothing presently is happening in their life that's dangerous. So an intrusive thought tend to fall, like we've talked about in our series, into the harm, the sex, the religious kind of categories. And what happens is anything that goes on in that psychological stress spectrum can turn into a wheel based on if we're engaging in behaviors. So it's not that, do I have anxiety and intrusive thoughts, or how do you define this, or any of that? It's just like, well, what's your experience? Are you experiencing anxiety and you have intrusive thoughts? Okay. You could probably categorize it under OCD, I guess, but it doesn't really matter, because what matters is what are we doing to help you address that? That's really where our focus should be. And how we define it really only serves to get us on the right path to recovery. That's the only real benefit I think a diagnosis has. I am not one who's very fond of diagnoses. I don't tend to believe in them very much because, I'm not saying, I think they help someone understand what's going on, but I think what happens is a lot of people then internalize them and then adopt beliefs about the diagnoses based on other information that is false. So they hear things like, well, you're going to have this forever. This is untreatable, or you can't get better, or all this other stuff. And therefore they believe that about themselves. This is terrible stuff. So when it comes to intrusive thoughts and anxiety, high levels of anxiety and high levels of stress, have this tendency to produce intrusive thoughts in people's mind. It doesn't mean anything bad about them. They're just intrusive thoughts. So when we're talking about intrusive thoughts are a normal experience. I would argue anxiety is actually a very normal experience, especially with how many of us live our lives in the fast pace we live and how little we actually take care of our mental and emotional health. So when we're starting to talk about defining it, it's really just about understanding your experience. If you're experiencing anxiety and intrusive thoughts, you don't really, I don't think you need to throw these definitions on it, and I mean, it's a great question that's asked, but it's not necessarily that there's this difference between intrusive thoughts and OCD. What can happen is someone can have an intrusive thought, not engage in any safety behaviors, and go about living their life. What happens with OCD is the person has an intrusive thought, starts engaging in compulsions, and can develop a full loop about this specific intrusive thought that ends up taking over their whole life for the next multiple years, even decades, And that's why what the work of Restored Minds is about, and the AAA response is about making sure we understand the loop itself, understanding all the ways it can form, and understanding what to do to really break the loop, right? So that's really how I would answer that question of what's the difference between intrusive thoughts and OCD. OCD is a loop someone gets caught in. An intrusive thought is just an intrusive thought, but people can get in loops about certain intrusive thoughts, right? In either way, I would say both experiences are actually quite normal of having anxiety and having intrusive thoughts. The loop happens when you have the intrusive thought or the thought anxiety, and the person starts engaging in compulsions and safety behaviors that then form that loop by giving the person temporary relief. So I always categorize and understand OCD as a loop that someone gets caught in that creates disorder in the person's life. I don't see OCD itself as a disorder, because the facts is that in order to get an OCD diagnosis, from any doctor or psychiatrist, you need both obsessions and compulsions present. And if you don't engage in compulsions and you don't have any compulsions present in your life, you can't have OCD. You can't have the loop, right? It doesn't mean you might not have thoughts or feelings. Those are normal human experiences, but the loop itself is like the presence of the thoughts and the anxiety is not an indication of a disorder, because they're common human experiences. The loop itself is what then creates disorder in the person's life. And obviously I know this firsthand as well, in my past experience with this loop. And this is why, doing this show, right, these workshops, the TBC program, working with people is such a big passion of mine, because a lot of times it's just how you understand something that changes the whole direction of your recovery process. So with that said, what's the difference between intrusive thoughts and anxiety and OCD? And can you have anxiety and intrusive thoughts, or does that mean you have OCD, all that stuff? The loop is really what we want to understand, and intrusive thoughts are a normal part of the human experience. So is anxiety, and what we really want to do is make sure it doesn't turn into a loop. So that's how I'd answer that question. I thought it was a great one, so thank you for sharing. And with that said, please make sure you join us on the workshop. Claim your seat while you can. And when you register, make sure to show up early, because we will be starting on time on the 30th, and I want to make sure that, if you want to attend live, that you're able to be with us. So click the link below, and you'll be able to get access to the workshop. And then, please help us out again by liking and subscribing, and leaving us a nice review on iTunes and Spotify. With all that, hope you guys have a great week, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Hey there. So if you enjoyed that video, we've linked up a few more videos that we think you'd find helpful as well. And if you have found this helpful, we'd really appreciate your support by liking and subscribing. And if you're looking for help and guidance, please check out restoredminds.com, as we have several options for you to get started. See you guys soon.